You know, for the Green Party, after last weekend, this election got even more interesting for us. The Working Families Party pretty much threw in the towel for progressive politics from their point of view for this year and left our candidacy as the progressive option on the ballot in November. And it opens up the possibility not only of us getting a double-digit vote, which is more than we even thought possible when we started this campaign, but under some scenarios, we could even win it. And my argument for that would be that if we have a three-way race, the candidate who wants a $15 an hour minimum wage, health care for all, a Green New Deal standing for full employment while acting on climate change, and who supports progressive tax reform to adequately fund our schools and local governments and reduce our property taxes because state mandates are now paid for, that candidate, and that's what I'm running on, will have more support among the voters than Andrew Cuomo and Rob Astorino, who I think their campaign strategy was to try to outbid each other on who can most and fastest cut taxes and spending, by which they really mean cut taxes for the 1% and cut spending on the schools and public services used by the 99%. And if we have a full debate and voters hear what their options are, I think the majority of voters will be with us. And then there are other issues where my candidacy stands out. A ban on fracking. I'm the only one calling for a ban on fracking. Astorino thinks fracking is the solution to our economic problems. I think it will ruin our economy as well as our environment. And Andrew Cuomo's sitting on the fence. And I think New York voters should be very angry that the legislature did not force a vote, at least on a moratorium, but especially on a ban, so we got Cuomo off the fence, because I think after the election, if he wins and if he turns to his presidential ambitions, he's going to open up New York to fracking because he's going to join the National Democratic Party consensus on fracking, which is pro-fracking. And we heard Schumer and Gillibrand actually kind of point that out a couple weeks ago, put Cuomo on the spot a little bit. And the other big issue, and this is what, when we started the campaign, we didn't quite realize how big an issue it is our schools. Our rural districts and our urban districts are underfunded. They're losing staff and programs. They're on the edge of insolvency. So they're mad as hell at Cuomo for keeping that gap elimination adjustment in the state budget, which means we're going to use the schools to balance the state budget. And then in the suburbs, they're mad as hell about Common Core and high-stakes testing and what it's doing to their kids and their kids' education. So we have heard a lot of response, particularly after last weekend. We've had 2 parent and teacher organizations endorse us, and that's just a few days after the Working Families Party endorsed Cuomo. And I think a lot of people, particularly those of us who are workers and concerned about low-wage workers, we have another deal that basically throws low-wage workers under the bus. We had this 2 years ago when Cuomo and the Working Families Party decided that rather than put the minimum wage into the state budget, they would have a separate vote and kind of put the senators on the spot. But at the same time, they allowed the Senate to gerrymander their districts in return for the Assembly gerrymandering their districts to save a few marginal Assembly people when the Democrats had an overwhelming majority in the Assembly. So it really wasn't about getting a Democratic majority in the Senate. And then Cuomo killed the minimum wage in 2012. And 2013, a minimum wage bill passed, which is, I call it the dumbest minimum wage bill in the world, because where they subsidize teenage workers, the difference between the old minimum wage and the new minimum wage, that subsidy doesn't apply if you pay a penny more than a minimum wage. So it's a ceiling as well as a floor, and then it goes away at age when the worker turns 20, and the employer has an incentive to fire that worker and hire a 16 or 18-year-old. But beside that, we have this minimum wage board that was supposed to be constituted to deal with food tip workers. That was part of the deal. And what are we now? Over 14 months since that law passed, and Cuomo has not convened it, and it was not part of the deal or discussion in the Working Families Cuomo deal. And there are other important issues that were left out. The fracking issue. It seems every election, as we approach the time to do nominations, the Working Families Party adopts green programs, like single-payer health care. They've been promoting and implementing Obamacare, and now they're for single-payer. Or 100% clean energy by 2030. I saw their convention had a workshop on that. That's great. We called for banning fracking in 2010, and after the election, Working Families has been collecting names on a petition ever since then. But when the deal was cut, those issues were not part of the deal. And the other big deal that was not part of the deal was the public sector workers and the tax and fiscal issues. And I've been talking to public sector union officials and rank and file, and they're mad as hell. We're having all kinds of people come to us, and we're getting contributions from workers in those sectors. So that, brings me back to the possibility of, what we can do in this election. We're the progressive alternative. We're the last one standing. And people say, well, that's crazy. Well, Jesse Ventura had 5% of the polling when he started, and over the course of the last 2 months of the campaign, ended up on top. And like I said before, he had a series of debates. That would be important. The media covered him. And one of the important things is that will make a difference. One of the contingencies is, will I be part of the regular narrative? And part of the debate is they cover the campaign, or will I be an aftermention when I'm lucky, an afterthought, and also ran? Because that sets up in the voters' minds how seriously they take my campaign. And another big factor will be whether the public employee unions, who would be really putting themselves on the spot, we recognize that because Cuomo believes in payback, if they endorse me. Or there are other ways they can help, they can make sure that their members know I'm an option without doing a formal endorsement. I mean, we'll talk about different ways they can help me. And I think I would also argue that the Working Families Party rank and file that's upset, and progressive Democrats that are upset with this deal, putting these issues off until next year, they should recognize that if those progressives don't vote, they're not going to win back the Senate. There are marginal races where they need voters. It's like Ralph Nader in 2000. Maria Cantwell in Washington and Debbie Stabenow in Michigan probably wouldn't have been elected to the Senate except for the Nader voters who, when they got to the Senate race, voted for the Democrat. I think that same scenario opens itself up here. And then also a big vote for my candidacy gives them leverage next year, because then they can go into the legislature and to Cuomo and say, if you don't start moving our way on some of these issues, the Greens are going to keep growing and start beating Democrats, or at least taking enough votes that they won't be winning. So I think, despite my, we did offer to the Working Families Party, we said, let's sit down and talk about how we can take on Cuomo. We have different strategies. They want to elect more Democrats. We want independent progressives. We want to be independent of the corporate money and funding that entangles them in these deals. But we still have, we're still going in one direction, and Cuomo and Astorino are going in the other. And that door, I would say, is still open, because, as I just pointed out, the Senate races, if they're serious about taking back the Senate, I can help them do that by bringing out voters who otherwise wouldn't vote. So I'm not sure what our ceiling is, but I know it's above the 5%, which was our most ambitious goal when we wrote our campaign plan a few months ago. We had the Siena and Quinnipiac polls. Take the Siena poll, 24% for unnamed Working Families Party candidate. I'm a working Teamster with a name. I think I'm the candidate those 24% were looking for. Astorino only had 24% in that poll, and Cuomo had 39%. We get a series of debates and we put the issues on the table. I think I'm within striking distance. It's a long shot, but I think whether we win or we get a double-digit vote, we can change the dynamics of politics in this state with this campaign. So with that, I welcome questions.
Howie, have you heard from the rank and file that you talked about from the Working Families Party since the convention? Has anyone come to you and expressed support?
Yes.
In light of what happened?
Contributions, messages, phone calls. We get a lot of people saying, I'm with you, Howie, and then I'll put in parentheses, former WFP. And these two endorsements, I think it was the Badass Teachers Association, I believe it's called, which, Diane Ravitch said nice things about him. She said she got over the name. She called him the tip of the spear in resisting this corporate privatization agenda. And then yesterday we got the United Opt-Out group, which I don't know much about. I think it's based on Long Island, where I know there's a lot of opt-out sentiment, as some of the teachers union people have been pointing me to. They're political people. So, you know, there are communications like that I'm getting from unions, sort of giving me tips about, you know, where to go and who to talk to. So yes, and then we've got particularly teachers seem to be giving us nice contributions. Our average contribution seems to be about $30, but we had a bunch of $100 contributions from teachers in the last few days.
Howie, if the Working Families Party had run their own candidate, what do you think the landscape of the race would have been? And do you think that that candidate could have potentially eaten into your total vote count?
Yeah, I think we would have divided the opposition to Cuomo. I think we both would have got 50,000 votes because there's so much opposition. These polls that have come out, I think, show that. As I understand it from reporting I've read, the 50,000 vote threshold was not an argument between the supporters of Teach Out and the supporters of Cuomo. It was more about their strategy and I guess whose arms were twisted and whose loyalties, you know, who owed who. So yeah, we would have divided it, but I think, you know, the combined vote would have sent a strong message to Cuomo. As I said, I think it was the first question here, I did my formal announcement here, and the first question is, what are you going to do if Working Families runs? I said they should run, and then I said, you know, maybe we should have a united fight, and they should nominate me. You know, we opened that door. We haven't really had a discussion at the leadership level, but I heard from state committee delegates of Working Families Party, Buffalo, Utica, Albany, who said they were going there to, you know, support opposition to Cuomo, and now I'm hearing from them that they're going to be working for me.
And sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Hawkins, it seems like every 4 years for the governor, there's a big issue about debates. Typically, if the incumbent is ahead, they resist making any commitment, and then perhaps at the last minute have one debate, maybe two. And meanwhile, we also get the issue about, well, do minor party candidates get included or not? Do independent candidates get included or not? Because, you know, obviously it dilutes the opportunity of the Republican and the Democrats. What criteria would you suggest a sponsoring organization apply to determine who should be included and who shouldn't?
I think being on the ballot is probably the most objective and fair standard. That can be abused because we've had candidates who didn't submit adequate petitions, but they weren't challenged. So having said that, I think that's the best objective criterion, the fairest. And I would urge media and civic organizations to set up debates and not get into this negotiation with, you know, they won't hold the debate unless, you know, Cuomo agrees. They should say, here are the terms, here are the dates, you know, let's talk about dates, but not let the major party candidates set the terms. What's really changed from, you know, say the 70s when League of Women Voters would set up a debate and the candidates felt obligated, is now the candidates are, you know, negotiating the terms. And I don't think that serves the voters well.
Howie, have you talked to Zephyr Teach yet?
No, but I would like to learn how to do the meetup she did with Howard Dean, because I think, you know, we could benefit from that. And it's something that I really haven't talked to my campaign team about, but I think I could learn something from her. I have not talked to her directly. I didn't even know who she was until last Thursday.
Do you want her to go on the Democratic primary? She's talking to him. She said she's thinking about it.
I haven't even thought about whether I wanted to or not. I think, you know, the reality is she'll lose the primary, and then what does she do? But I think we could have a useful discussion. You know, how do we advance the issues we share? Campaign finance reform. You know, if she was in the debate, we'd have an interesting debate. She's for the partial bill, you know, maybe a better version of the silver bill. I'm for full public financing like they have in Maine and Arizona. She might privately agree with me, but, you know, maybe support the partial bill as a step forward. So, yeah, I would like to talk to her.
Wondering what you think of the governor today was at Western New York appearing with some Republican senators, at least one of them. They're touting his tax-free New York program a few days after he said he was going to work against them and take the Senate back from the Democrats.
Well, the fiscal issues were not part of the deal with Working Families, so I can't say he walked back from that. He's doing what he has been doing. But the day after the deal was struck, he was down there in New York City walking back his commitment to defeating the Senate. He was saying, well, you know, there's some Democrats aren't with me, I might not support them, and there's some Republicans with me, I might support them. And then he was sort of setting limits on the minimum wage part of the deal. I think his main strategy, and the other quote that really struck me, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, the important thing is I won the nomination. I mean, after working families gave him the nomination, they gave him all the power. They don't have any leverage till after the election.
Howie, what would you, the other day the governor bet with Governor Jerry Brown on the Stanley Cup. Did you hear about this at all? He bet him like a Cuomo puck versus some rice cakes. Any thoughts on that, or what you might be betting on the Stanley Cup? You watching the Stanley Cup?
I'm a inner city kid who plays basketball and baseball, football. I don't quite understand all the rules of hockey. It's kind of like soccer. I kind of get that game too. And I haven't followed. I did catch the San Antonio Spurs, who were fun to watch because they know how to pass the ball. We had a fundraiser down in New York, and we had Shama Sawant, the socialist councilwoman in Seattle, where they just got the $15 wage, and had a great fundraiser. When you say Jerry Brown, I say, progressives in this state, watch out for the Democrats. When Schwarzenegger was governor, the Democrats in the legislature passed single-payer health care, and Schwarzenegger twice vetoed it. Now they got both chambers and the governorship, and single-payer doesn't get voted on. It's one thing to put a popular program out when it can't pass. It's another thing to vote for it against the special interest when it can. And I think the same dynamic is in play here in New York. And that's why, working people need to look to have their own party that will speak for themselves. We have nothing to lose. My example is always Fannie Lou Hamer. When she was offered the deal back in '64, you get to sit in the back, Mississippi Freedom Democrats are challenging Dixiecrats, and Johnson sends Humphrey and Mondale, the liberals, to tell her, we'll deal with civil rights in '68, you get 2 token seats in the Dixiecratic delegation. And she said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's what a working person does, because they have nothing to gain by compromising and cutting a deal. So that's what I would say to progressives. Let's speak and act and organize for ourselves, and not rely on cutting deals with elites who can sell us out, and they have time and time again.
What are we going to see from you this summer? Any campaign plans, door to door? What are you thinking?
Well, we've hired our first.
I know you're still working.
Yeah, I'm actually on disability. I got to have an inguinal surgery operation next Tuesday.
Okay.
But I'll be back to work early July, and I'll work till Labor Day, and then I'll ask for unpaid leave. But on weekends and evenings, well, during the day before I go to work, I'll be campaigning all I can.
Yeah.
House parties, raising money. But we're going to organize hire field organizers. Our plan, we got a cash flow budget, and it looks like we're raising enough money. 4 field offices, New York, Albany, Syracuse, and Western New York. And right now we have that office open in Syracuse. We're looking to open one quickly in New York City. And then we're going to try to do sort of the do-it-yourself, where people can form their own committees. We got online flyers people can download. We'll have a kit people can do to get started, and then these organizers can help them. So we'll do a lot of that. We want to raise enough funds to do some broadcast advertising. We're not going to be able to do it at the level Cuomo is. We're not going to saturate, but we can hopefully get the message out, do some interesting ads that will be stories in themselves. And so I'll say this, at this time, 4 years ago, I had just been nominated, and we were like preparing our petitions. The media really didn't want to cover us because we weren't on the ballot yet. That wouldn't happen until the end of August. We had no money. First fundraising letter went out in July. I'm now between 30 and 35,000. I don't know exactly. Last time total raise was 45,000. So we're way ahead of the game of where we were last time. And the other thing, which I think is even bigger, is this poll. When we did our campaign plan, 50,000 votes is our minimum goal to keep the ballot line. And then we said, what we felt was very ambitious, 5%, 250,000 votes would be as much as the independent left ever got in New York history for governor. And after these polls came out, we wondered if we were shooting too low. And then after the response we got when working families threw in the towel in terms of challenging Cuomo, you know, like I said, I think double digits is definitely within reach, and the sky's the limit.
Howie, I'm sorry, I walked in late, so if you answered this, apologies. Did the working families do you a favor by backing Cuomo? And if so, sort of, what do you, I know you just talked about this in the poll, but what do you see the potential there for unifying disaffected Democrats, working family party members?
I think, you know, in terms of narrow Green Party interests, they probably did us a favor because we're the progressive alternative and people want that. These polls indicate that. In terms of the progressive movement, you know, we might have been stronger with, you know, their resources joining our resources and going after Cuomo and pushing the issues, you know, the direction we both want to go in. You know, I think unity would be better than competition. Even if we were running parallel tracks. But that's not what, they didn't choose that path. So, you know, in terms of building the Green Party, I think, yeah, they handed the torch to us for the progressive movement in the state.
If you do buy broadcast, what would your strategy be? Are there markets where you think would be best spent?
Yeah, we've done a little bit of this in past campaigns, and the upstate markets are much less expensive than New York City. And, you know, we tend to go with the, you know, the sort of newsy kind of programs, whether it's Time Warner Cable News, 24 News, or the Daily Show, which is much more expensive, but, you know, gets a demographic where people might be interested in what we're talking about. But we also try to do an ad that's a story in itself. You know, I think his name is Bill Hinsman, did Nader's ad, he did Jesse Ventura's ad. Remember, Jesse the Body became Jesse the Thinker. And then Nader's ad was the takeoff on MasterCard. You know, what was the phrase they used? Priceless. So, you know, they had Bush and Gore, you know, at these big fundraisers getting all this money, and then Ralph Nader in front of these stacks of files and filing cabinets, you know, working for the people, priceless. And that was a good ad. And then MasterCard sued, which gave us another story, and then they dropped it, which gave us another story. You know, I would love to get Hinsman to help our campaign. He helped our Green presidential candidate last time, but we got to raise enough funds to do it. But that would be, you know, given our limited media budget, you know, we would try to do something really creative and interesting that got some attention. I mean, last time we had the Where Are the Effing Jobs ad that was just on video. We didn't try to put that on broadcast. We did put some other ads on broadcast, more straight, you know, presentation. But, you know, we're going to try to be creative and make the ads themselves generate earned media as well as paid media.
Just to clarify, you want a $15 minimum wage, and how do you want to raise money for the state budget?
Go back basically to the kind of tax structure we had in the 1970s. We keep the stock transfer tax.
Stop rebating all of it?
Stop rebating all of it. We kept all of it until '79 and then phased it out to zero, you know, 100% rebate in '81. Now with high frequency trading, that's very lucrative, even though it's pennies per share per trade. That's 15 billion. I'm using round numbers. It's been between 12 and 16 in recent years. There's a study that the Fiscal Policy Institute did. It's a little old, but it might even generate more income than it would then because income has concentrated at the top since the recession. This study's from 2005, but if we went back to the 1970s progressive income tax structure, 95% of us would get a tax cut, but because of the higher brackets, higher marginal rates on top incomes from the top 5% and particularly the top 1%, we generate $8 billion more. And then there's $7 billion in corporate welfare, which was near zero in the 70s and really ramped up since the 90s. And from the tax commission study, or a study commissioned by one of Cuomo's tax commissions, they looked at the job creation of what we've given in corporate tax breaks, and it's actually lost jobs, 175,000 since '94. Eliminate that. So you got 15, 8, and 7. That's 30 billion. State budget's about 140 billion. So we're talking between 20 and 25% more revenues. And we would use that, first of all, to restore revenue sharing to what was a statutory 8% in 1979 and has been cut down to the point now where it's less than 1% of state revenues. And Cuomo
For
eliminated that.
municipalities, that's AIM.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's gone under different names, but the basic idea is 8% of state revenues were supposed to be shared. And that was supposed to pay for the state mandates. By cutting that down, we get unfunded mandates, we gotta raise our property and sales taxes.
Right.
I think that's much bigger and substantial property tax and sales tax relief, which are regressive taxes, than Cuomo's little temporary plan, which in my city, average homeowner gets $30. In Ithaca, they get $7.31. It's hardly worth it. And we could fully fund the schools and do the things we want to talk about in the Green New Deal. So that's where the money would come from. The wage would come from employers paying a living wage. We're not going to subsidize that wage. In fact, what we'll end up doing is cutting public expenses for not unemployment insurance, but rent assistance, Medicaid, food stamps, because a lot of the low-wage workers, you get a job at Walmart and they'll give you your food stamps application as soon as you're hired. So that saves money on the public side.
Yeah, you're for 100% public financing, but given the fact that, I don't know whether it's 10, 20, or 30% of the revenue of television stations now comes from political campaigns, in a sense, isn't public financing, without doing anything about that situation, simply handing public money over to private corporations, and doesn't really eliminate the fact that elections have been privatized, essentially, in the United States?
I hadn't thought of it that way. I do know when they talked about federal full public campaign financing, and there's no bill before Congress that I can find. They've sort of gone to the matching funds model now. The broadcasters are required to provide public debates as part of the deal. I think the problem we have now is that the political advertising is a big revenue boost for commercial broadcasters. And you wonder if that doesn't bias their coverage, or who they think is important to negotiate with when they set up debates. If everybody has an equal grant for public funding, I'm not sure it biases their coverage, because they're getting, I guess, the amount of viewers they have on their different programs will motivate the candidates to contribute. So I'm not sure it reprivatizes, because
I'm not saying it reprivatizes it, it still leaves the electoral process privatized to a certain degree, as opposed to having free time for each qualified candidate as a requirement of public service for these corporations that use the public airways.
And I believe that was part of the federal bill. I don't know if you can do that at the state level. I understand your point now, yeah.
On the rebating of the stock transfer tax, the people who run the exchanges have suggested in no uncertain terms that if that tax is reimposed, they'll find someplace else to go, Connecticut, New Jersey, someplace. And with telecommunications, that certainly does seem possible. You do not have a concern about losing the market entirely?
I don't think we'll lose it entirely. I have a concern about it. I've been trying to figure it out. I know they've got, I just read that book by Michael Lewis, Flash Boys, I think it's called, where you've got, 43 dark money pools within firms and 18 exchanges, and they do this, they got these wires where
They get an advantage by taking a
they do
tiny little bit of time.
They do arbitrage between the different exchanges. I call it computerized insider trading. And those are all in New Jersey. And then they're linked to the Chicago exchange as well by these wires with this fiber optics. So the trades are actually happening in New Jersey, but the stocks are listed in the New York Stock Exchange. So that's one thing. It's just technically, they say, well, they just moved it over there, but they already have moved over there to some extent. I know there have been recent financial transaction taxes in Europe, and my understanding is they have not lost business. So the tax is so small on each trade that, when they imposed that tax in 1906, the stock exchange said the same thing. In the early 2000s, they said if you don't do a massive subsidy to build us a new New York Stock Exchange, we're moving across the river. 2001, 9/11 happened, and they didn't get subsidized, and they haven't brought it up since. So, businesses are always making that threat. It's something to keep an eye on and be concerned about. I respect David K. Johnston. He said, that's a problem with that tax. But right now, we're collecting it and giving it back. No more questions? Well, I appreciate everybody coming. Thank you.